is a masculinity crisis nowadays caused by all the changes that happened in the last 50 years on the social level that I'm not going to talk about. But we all know that masculinity definition is changed, and by masculinity I mean the series of character traits and behaviors usually associated with manhood, and the stereotype that nowadays and 50 years ago of the masculine man was the jacked, high status, with a lot of women and a lot of money. This is what peak masculinity was like, and was someone who is able to conquer and have a lot of materialistic success. This is also the definition of toxic masculinity that we have nowadays. And I believe that this definition of masculinity is very restrictive and doesn't take into consideration all a full spectrum of other aspects that are often foreseen, not seen, okay? And we don't have any examples of that in our modern world. But what is not found in our modern world, I believe, can be found in our collective subconscious and in past stories and myths. What I want to talk about is the Robert Moore book, who is a Jungian psychologist who described in his book 4 archetypes of mature masculinity that cover a wider spectrum of what it means to be a mature man. And I'm going to explain these archetypes one by one in order for you to understand what my point actually is. The first archetype is the warrior. The warrior represents the character traits associated with courage, discipline, hard work, and physical prowess. So the warrior archetype is someone who works hard, who doesn't shy away from challenges and confronts problems and his enemies openly in the battlefield, okay? He pursues his goals relentlessly and doesn't complain about pain and discomfort. This is the more classical view of masculinity, the strong man who is disciplined, who follows his goals relentlessly. And if the warrior is underdeveloped in the psyche of man, it leads to over-agreeableness, so not being authentic, so being too much compliant to the desires of other people, and the inability to face life challenges and discomfort. Not only physical discomfort, but also mental discomfort, the not being liked. Also the fact that you are not able to overcome procrastination because you're afraid of a certain outcome, afraid of failure, for example. This is another underdevelopment of the warrior archetype in your psyche. And for every archetype, there is also a shadow side, which is the development of this archetype, but used for the evil. It looks a lot like Dungeons and Dragons, I get it, but it's cool also for that reason. The shadow side of the warrior is the barbarian, which is someone who uses his courage, his physical prowess, his physical dominance to hurt other people and detach himself from compassion. An example that we see that also in social media, not only social media, on mass media, on fiction, on myths. And an example of warrior in mass media culture is, for example, Captain America, which is someone who is a soldier, so someone who fights people, someone who uses his incredible physical prowess, mostly because he's juiced as fuck, but that's another topic, for a good cause. While a shadow could be Conan the Barbarian, the famous character which we look in the film with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and in the fiction books, which I don't remember the name of the author, but I will put them around here. And the best way to understand the psychology of the barbarian is the famous quote of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Conan, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of your women.
This is what the barbarian is. The shadow side of the warrior is doing chaos, causing harm for the sake of creating chaos and harm. This is the destructive element of the masculinity, which is the toxic side of masculinity. And the way to develop your warrior archetype is to involve some kind of physical exertion. So weightlifting, try to go into martial arts and try to develop your ability to be harmful, but not using that ability for the bad. And this is the more classical way to express masculinity, the way that everyone would agree it's very masculine. The warrior is a very masculine way. But then we have other three archetypes to describe what being a man actually is. The second archetype is the king, and the king represents the character traits associated with leadership, vision, wisdom, and order. The king archetype is the one who is able to remain calm under pressure, that creates harmony in his environment and take charge of the decision that needs to be taken and guiding his people to a brighter future. It's like the one who has a vision for the future and works toward it. It's not like the warrior, because the warrior is someone who is disciplined and work very closely to something, while the king is a visionary, is someone who is sharing his vision with his people and it's leading them to that brighter future. Is kind of different. And if underdeveloped, the king archetype leads to undecisiveness, to feeling stuck and creating chaos in the environment. It's creating disorder in the psyche and in environment around us. And while the shadow side of the king is the tyrant, or someone that uses his position of power to oppress and submit instead of leading and protecting. An example of the king archetype is the classical Aragorn from The Lord of the Rings, which is someone who is called to adventure, is to restore Gondor's old glory and to take his place to the throne in order to lead his kingdom to a brighter future. While an example of tyrant could be King Joffrey Baratheon from Game of Thrones, which is someone who has a position of power, but he uses that power in order to fulfill his own sadistic desires and to oppress other people. He's not leading his kingdom to no good place. And a practical way to develop the king archetype is by taking responsibility for something and deciding to put in order where you have control. Cleaning your room, for example, the famous meme from Jordan Peterson, which is just that, making an act of responsibility towards the environment around you and put it in order. Now we are getting into two of the most interesting, I would say, because it's not talked often, because even the ability of leadership is something that is spoken in the discourse about masculinity. But what is not talked about is the third archetype, which is the magician. The magician is all about knowledge, about understanding, about introspection, creative problem solving, and all of these traits are associated with the archetype of the magician, which is someone who has a lot of knowledge, a lot of understanding of the environment around him and is able to manipulate the environment to his wish. This is also an expression of masculinity. And an underdevelopment of the magician is someone who remains ignorant, unable to perceive his interior voice or unable to foresee the possibility of action in his environment. Is someone who is consistently rushing towards a moment without a moment left to think and reorganize his plans, all right? While a shadow side of the magician is someone who uses his knowledge and manipulation of the environment to manipulate people around him for his own personal goals. An example of the magician in, let's say, our modern concrete world is, for example, an entrepreneur who uses his knowledge in technology and let's say science in general in order to create a creation that benefits all society. For example, Mark Zuckerberg, we can debate about if Mark Zuckerberg is a shadow magician or a good magician, but he is someone who uses his knowledge and technology in order to create value, to create something in the world that other people can use and benefit. This is something that is not talked about, and I'm going to go to that point later. I'm going to explain first the fourth archetype, which is something that is even less talked about, which is the lover. The lover is the archetype that incarnates the appreciation for beauty, art, poetry, pleasure, and romantic interest. And the lover in the human psyche is the way to connect deeply to other people and to the beauty around you. And the lover is the one who is able to see art, is able to see nature, beauty, and is able to feel it deeply. If someone have an underdeveloped lover, he is unable to perceive his own emotion, he is unable to perceive beauty around him, he is detached from his inner world. His desires are shut down. He maybe pursue goals, he is maybe driven towards big ambitions, but he's not able to perceive happiness and beauty around him. An example of the lover is Romeo from the Shakespeare famous opera Romeo and Juliet, and he's a young man that lives his emotion openly and intensely and express them with no sign of regret or shame, which is he feels and perceives life's experience as fully as he possibly can. While a shadow example is Don Juan, who used his charm to seduce his ladies for his own personal pleasure without truly loving them. He's using them as bodies to satisfy his own needs, but without truly loving them. This is the shadow side, which is someone who goes into dopaminergic treadmill, who goes downhill of seeking mindless pleasure without truly perceiving the beauty of life has to offer. Now that we have looked at all these different expressions of masculinity, why am I telling this? What am I telling is that being a man is about understanding themselves completely, our strength, our weaknesses, and natural inclination. And of course, into unhealthy psyche, all of these four elements need to be integrated. We cannot be a mature man if all these elements are truly integrated, but we get to understand that our natural inclinations, what our natural inclinations are, and lean into them as much as we possibly can. Because what is talked a lot is the archetype of the king. Or you gotta be responsible, you gotta take charge, you gotta be you gotta lead people, you gotta be a leader. Or the warrior archetype, which is the most classical example of masculinity. Or you gotta be strong, you gotta be driven towards goals, you gotta be disciplined, you gotta work hard, which is right. I don't mean it. I deeply believe in all of these values, okay? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that when everyone tell you to man up, to become more like a man, no one talks about the magician, no one talks about the lover. And there are a lot of men out there who feel lost because they have a natural inclination towards these two archetypes, towards being an intelligent man who understands the environment around him, that he's able to manipulate it and to explain his knowledge to the world. This must be seen as healthy masculinity. This has to be seen as something that is reward from society. Or a poet, someone who is able to write something and able to share it with other people for them to see the beauty of his creations. This must be seen as positive masculinity also, because if you are born with these gifts and you are forced to lean into an archetype that is not yours, that is not in your inclination, it would be a shame, because the world wouldn't have the gifts that you can share with it, right? As someone who is born with innate physical strength and prowess would probably lean into the warrior because he's born with that character traits. Someone who is born with a talent for math and science would lean into a magician archetype. And we don't have to put this into different categories. And this is not to say, oh, if you're big and strong naturally, don't learn things, don't learn how to be more sensitive, don't learn how to take charge. I'm not saying that. This is me after editing with a different sweater because the file decided to corrupt in the last 2 minutes. But what I wanted to convey to you is that you gotta lean into the type of archetype that you most feel authentic and that you have the most natural inclination. We don't have to place hierarchies or categories. For example, here's the king, here's the warrior, here's the wizard. I'm not saying this is not what we should aim for. What we should aim for is to encourage men to become what they are on the inside, to express their own talents and make them in service for everyone around them. And I believe that we would create a better society and a more healthy masculinity. This is what I want to tell you. Remember to aim upward as always.